What is up? And welcome to the Bet Chicago Sports Podcast. I'm Shane Jackson. Joining me today is Kyle Nabors, our sports editor. And boy, is it good to have football back. Week one was fun for both the Chicago Bears and myself. The Chicago Bears pulled off a big upset over the San Francisco 49ers. I wrote plenty of betting analysis over at shawlocal.com/bet on this particular game, obviously, as I will do all year. And all the main plays I gave out won. Bears +7. Didn't need the points because they won outright. Under 41.5. That thing closed at 38. Wasn't even close in a 19-10 victory for the Bears. 29 total points. And obviously, because both teams were playing in a monsoon, Justin Fields under 17.5 completions was pretty safe. I think he finished 8 of 17 or somewhere around there on the day. So pretty much a sweat-free 3 plays there. I guess the Bears kind of started slow in a 10-0 game. But ended up rattling off 19 straight points for the win. We will break down basically all week one. We'll focus on some of the betting stuff, but mostly analysis. We will start with obviously the Bears because our loyal listeners probably care about that a little bit more. And honestly, it turned out pretty well for the Bears. So Kyle, I know you kind of broke this game down a little bit earlier on your show, but tell me what kind of stood out to you first glance from the Bears victory.
Well, it starts out, you got to wonder, and I think everyone in Chicagoland around, and really around the country, when it comes to week one, we know there's overreactions. And the Bears winning, that would cause an overreaction to begin with. But now it really starts to go, well, how much did the weather play a factor in that game? Now, both teams had to obviously play in those elements, but you don't know how teams react to that. The Bears clearly played better down the stretch. Trey Lance really struggled in the second half, particularly in the fourth quarter when that rain was driving down. But, that's kind of the thing for a sports betting angle here, that you're trying to figure out. I'm sure you're trying to figure out, okay, what do I do with the Bears after seeing that in week one?
It's completely hard. I think I mentioned something, in the first quarter that like it was going to be tough to take too much from this game if both teams were going to play so conservative in this kind of monsoon, and rightfully so, right? But it just wasn't like it didn't feel like a real football game, and much that you can glean. And obviously, there's only so much you can glean from the opening week of action. It's such a small sample size, but it felt impossible to say, "Hey, this is who the Bears are." In the offseason, we heard, hey, this offense can open up. They got some things hidden under their sleeve. Didn't get to see any of that really because they were limited to what they could do. And so, yeah, I think it is very hard from a betting angle. I am curious to how this relates to at least week two, right? They have a Sunday night football matchup now against the Packers. And the Bears opened as a 9.5 point underdog.
I was surprised to see it at 9.5.
What is interesting is because Caesar Sportsbook, which is the official odds partner of Bet Chicago Sports, you can sign up today by scanning that QR code right there in the right corner and get a risk-free bet for your first bet. But basically, they had odds all summer, and it was 10 points for this game. And now they've dropped it down to 9.5 for the opening price when they kind of pulled off the lines and released them again. It has moved up to 10 as of this morning. Which is where I think it was going to settle in double digits most likely. So it is curious though, right? Because you mentioned it. What do you take from it? The Packers lost in week one. The Bears won in week one. It was that a little bit of an overreaction because of that, and that's why they dropped it below to 9.5. And honestly, there was an 8.5 available.
So I have a friend that's a pretty big sports bettor, and he sent me a message last night before the line was out, or at least he knew it was out. And like I said, he's a pretty big sports bettor. He's actually pretty good at it. And he's like, if this game, if the Bears, lose week one and Green Bay wins or plays well in week one, at least, this is probably a 10-point spread. He's like, I'm guessing it's going to come out at like 4.5 or 5. And Vegas did not buy it based on yesterday's results. And I think that was a smart decision on them. With that being said, it's less about how the Bears performed and more on how Green Bay performed, which was not well. Now they played really poorly week one last year, and we know how that all went. So again, we're talking about a small sample size. Don't overreact to week one. But when you consider what Green Bay lost off that offense last season, and you were wondering about Devontae Adams and how his departure would affect them, They were without Alan Lazard in week 1. Don't know if he's going to be back for week 2. That's really kind of a weird, murky situation where we don't know exactly what's going on, I don't think. I do feel like there's some value at the Bears, particularly obviously if it opened at 9.5 and it quickly moved to 10, that means a lot of money, a lot of large money probably coming in on the Packers early, right? I think that's a mistake at that. I do think the Bears are going to be able to keep this game close, based on what I saw of the Green Bay Packers, at least in week 1.
Yeah, full disclosure, I think the line movement is indicative of Adam Chernoff of covers.com. He has a telegram. I think he gave out Packers -9 or -9.5 this morning. I'm guessing that's what moved the line this morning. A bunch of bets followed him on that. And maybe you do see some buyback at some point. I think what you mentioned is pretty interesting about the Packers, right? A lot of focus is going to be on that receiver room, and rightfully so. But I was more concerned with like their offensive line, obviously being down without their tackles. The rookie guard didn't play too well either. The Bears created pressure without blitzing yesterday on Trey Lance. So how much is that? Can you carry over from the monsoon that was that game into an area where I think the Bears maybe could expose the Packers and make this a little bit more competitive? It is the question, right? So I do want to focus a little bit on that defense because they did play so well, especially those young guys for the Bears. What did you see from the Bears defense, and what kind of stood out to you?
So Sean and I were talking about this on the Bears Insider podcast that we streamed live this morning, and then it'll be available this afternoon on iTunes and Spotify. But we had generally decent expectations for this defense to begin with. We thought it would be a middle of the pack unit, somewhere probably in that anywhere from like 14 to 18 range in terms of overall defensive efficiency when it came to the end of the season. Now, once again, only week 1. But the thing that we thought that could really have some upside was there's a lot of young ascending players on this defense. You look at Jalen Johnson, Roquan Smith, obviously the two biggest names. You had a really good breakout year from Travis Gibson, opposite of Robert Quinn. And then you had the youngsters and those second-round picks in Kyler Gordon and Juwan Brisker. Both of them played well yesterday, particularly Brisker. Brisker was flying all over the field. Kyler Gordon had his ups and downs, got turned around in coverage a couple different times, but really performed well overall and got better as the game went on. And then Dominic Robinson is really the big story from week 1. 1.5 sacks in limited playing time, was really flying all over the field. And you start to get the sense, again, it's hard to tell because of the effect that the weather had on that game, but you start to get the feeling that this is going to be a solid defensive unit, that what we expected to be, what we expected from them looks like our expectations are at least going to be met, if not exceeded a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that was kind of the interesting thing about maybe the narrative, especially with this group when it was during the draft time, right? Everyone obviously wanted the Bears to get more weapons for Justin Fields, but that didn't take away from the fact that they drafted good guys, right? Well, when they drafted Brisker and Kyler Gordon, like those were good picks at the time. And I think they saw right away the kind of that impact of that. And I think that was kind of worth noting because even if it was maybe rain induced, like these guys are expected to play and make an impact right away. And so I am curious because defense tends to be somewhat of a fluky stat every, year to year in terms of where you rank. I am curious when it's all said and done where this group, lines up. And maybe this sets up for a decent matchup because the Packers are down from a receiver standpoint and an offensive line standpoint, and maybe they can string a couple performances back to back like this. But I am curious to see where this group ends up because I think that tells a lot about what the Bears will do, especially from a win total perspective.
So one thing to, I guess, throw a little water on the fire when it comes to the Bears defense is this was the first time NFL teams are going to have game film at full speed with the Bears showing what they plan to do on defense. So not only do NFL teams now have some film on them, but they're also going to see, those rookies played well, but what mistakes did they make? We now have an idea of where they can be exploited. Teams are going to start to try and do that. It's up to the Bears to make sure that they also, and of course they're watching the film. They're doing it right now before Matt Eberflus meets the media at 3:00. I'm sure it's probably already their second or third watch of the film. And they're going to be going through, hey, this is what you guys missed. Those opposing teams know that as well. So it's a chess game in the NFL. So week 2, week 3, we're gonna see really quickly if teams pick up on any ways to exploit that defense.
It should also be noted the quarterback will be much better in week 2 that the Bears face. Yeah.
I want to get your take on that from a sports betting perspective. And again, everything we have to say preface as it's hard to tell with the rain, but Trey Lance,
brutal day to play quarterback.
No, he had an easy 6 points to Tyler Kroft and just missed the throw. Mm-hmm. That game looks a lot different if he hits that, but Trey Lance did not play well. They lost Elijah Mitchell in the first half of the game. Forgive me if I'm wrong there, but not sure how long he's going to be out. They had no George Kittle. George Kittle has struggled to stay on the field now for the last few years. Did your expectations? Sorry, I just see Logan Bannister here. Much more to the Trey Lance. Yeah, he stunk yesterday, man. Are your expectations or outlook on the San Francisco 49ers at all swayed by what you saw yesterday?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because my priors were probably already down on Lance by comparison to the market going into the year. You know, I didn't understand why the 49ers were viewed as this kind of top 10 power rated team right away. I thought maybe eventually it could all click for them, but I figured there would be growing pains. Trey Lance has now made 3 starts for Kyle Shanahan. 2 of them now rank in the worst 17 performances by a 49ers quarterback in the Kyle Shanahan era. And those quarterbacks that Kyle Shanahan has coached are like CJ Beathard, Nick Mullins, Brian Hoyer. Yeah. Like, it is brutal. And so I preface this by all saying that, like, Trey Lance is probably going to figure it out. You know, they play the Seahawks next week in week 2 at home. Like, there's a very good chance that they're able to do a lot better job of maybe getting him more involved and giving him more easy throws. But I mean, it felt like he had some easy throws, right? Like, it's just, it was a pretty rough day for Trey Lance.
I'm a big best ball guy when it comes to fantasy sports. I draft a ton of teams before the season begins. And one of my biggest takes was I thought Trey Lance was going to have a very good year, at least from a fantasy perspective. And usually if they have a good year from a fantasy perspective, it's a good year from a sports betting perspective. So I'm way over the field when it comes to like Trey Lance ownership. So seeing that yesterday kind of scared me a bit.
Yeah. And without question, he was the worst quarterback that played this weekend. You know, if you look at the EPA charts, like, he's the worst quarterback that played this weekend. It was only 1 week. He did play in a monsoon, but again, like, Justin Fields played in the same conditions, and he was a big difference in the Bears winning that game. He made 3 of the biggest plays in the game for the Bears. And so I think that is just maybe an example of where, you can take some of that game, but not a whole lot. I mean, it was a bad day to play quarterback, but again, Justin Fields was the difference. And what did you think? That's where I wanted to go to kind of close out this Bears talk. What did you think about Justin Fields and maybe that offense in particular in week 1?
Well, it was great to see it get better as the game went along, because all of us who've covered the Bears for a while, we're sitting there at a halftime going, we have 16 more of these after this week. Oh no. Like we sat through several years of very inefficient, poor performance from the offense. And frankly, you saw a lot of that in the first half. Justin Fields, I believe the Bears had 3 net passing yards at halftime. They didn't complete a pass to a wide receiver or a tight end. And then it got considerably better in the second half. Not perfect by any means, but better. They made the correct adjustments. They were getting the ball out quicker. And then, it was a broken play, like that first touchdown to Dante Pettis, but Justin Fields did what he needed to do there. He was able to extend a play. He kept his eyes downfield, which was something that he struggled with for a lot of times last year. Was once he did break that pocket, his eyes weren't following the receivers. They weren't leading receivers to open parts of the field. He kept his eyes downfield, got himself into a position to make a throw and execute it. And that's a good sign. How many times, if you're a Bears fan, have you seen that happen to this team over the years and said, why can't we have that happen? So that's definitely good. It's also positive. The offensive line struggled in the first half. Kevin Jenkins got beat early in that game. Braxton Jones got beat early in that game. And they got beat by, Javon Kinlaw and Nick Bosa, very, very good football players. But it was good to see they got better as the game went along. And from a betting perspective, that gives you a better sense or a better feel that this offense is going to progress. And even when they have a bad start, that this coaching staff is in the position to be able to make the necessary adjustments.
Yeah, betting wise, I'm curious, and Justin Fields kind of alluded to this in his comments, post game comments, is that the way the 49ers are playing, like they didn't have as much chances to kind of roll him out and get him out in the open. Because I was thinking like the way to attack the Bears game on Sunday morning, seeing all that rain come down, I was like, hey, maybe the Bears will lean into Justin Fields' legs and run him a little bit. I think he finished with fewer than 30 yards. His prop line was in the mid 30s range, so he went under. I thought for sure, like maybe that was the angle, and maybe that would be a case of what you see moving forward, maybe using him a little bit more. So, again, I think there's only so much you can take away from week one for this, especially from this game. But I was a little bit concerned, at least with the offense early on. Too many runs on 2nd and 10 to set up 3rd and long. It was brutal.
There are a few things, and it doesn't matter if I'm covering the Bears or I'm watching any football game. Like as someone, I'm very analytics driven, and the analytics are squarely against 2nd and long runs. Like I hate teams that pass on 1st down, and if they have an incompletion, they run the ball on 2nd down. No, you're already behind schedule. Stop that. Don't do that. That's silly. Now, I'm not saying that you need to be 100% passing on 2nd and long, but there were some signs that I was like, that's not great. But I wanted to ask you, when you see the weather in the fashion that it was yesterday, at what point as a sports bettor does it become actionable for you? Like where you say, I need to get in on this before like the line adjusts.
Yeah, well, I think I'm maybe the wrong person to ask in this exact case because I was stupid and bet the over on game day. My dad was at the game and he said, "Hey, it's letting up." It turns out he was in a suite and it didn't matter that he was not getting rained on. And I bet the over when I got down to 37 and a half. I was like, "Oh, this is crazy." I still think 38, 39 points is the most likely outcome here.
And then you saw them squeegeeing water off the field pregame, and you're like, I may have made a mistake with this one.
Opening kickoff, seeing those feet on the ground and the water just come, I was like, it's done. There's no way. So I do think it's interesting, though, because weather has a drastic impact. You can look at the forecast, the day before, and you knew rain was coming, right? And so the line didn't start crashing down until Sunday morning, until NFL Network is showing, hey, it's pouring. There's a lot of rain. Like, that's when the line started crashing because everybody's betting it. And so I think there is a way you can, if you look at the weather in advance, you can take advantage. I think there's also, like, not in this case, there's a way to, like, not overreact, right? If you see weather adjust the line, maybe you can take the other side depending on what the weather is and how bad it can be. Because sometimes, bad field position leads to easy points, right? The Bears were never in good field position early in that game, but the 49ers certainly could have scored a lot more early on if they had finished out drives. So, there was a way that the over could have hit yesterday. Obviously never had a chance, though.
Yeah, it's the weather is a little more difficult to predict, I feel like, for over-unders for the reason that you are talking about. Like, weird things happen, short fields happen where points can add up quick. I do think it has a larger impact on prop bets. When you're talking, over-unders for yardage totals, for completion totals, stuff like that. It's something that I'm a big DFS guy every week. I make sure on Saturday evening I'm looking at weather reports to know, because that makes a on roster construction for DFS. I don't want guys that are playing in bad weather games. I want points scored. And I'm sure it's the same thing for sports betting. Like, if you're taking the over-under, and I'm just throwing out a name here, like Darnell Mooney receiving yards, weather conditions have a big impact on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very curious about seeing what this team looks like on dry land moving forward. But at least the Bears got a big win. I think we will move on to teams who did play on dry land in week one, and especially with the NFC North focus here. We kind of alluded to it earlier, obviously, but Packers, Vikings ended up being an early, NFC North showdown. And maybe the Vikings kind of sent a statement with their week one win, because they led start to finish against the Packers. What did you take? We talked from the Packers side, but what did you mostly take away from that game?
Where to start? Number one, the first thing, like I said, so I was working on getting all of our content up on channellocal.com after the Bears game. So I was kind of looking up and down, trying to watch it. Every single time I looked up, Justin Jefferson was running by himself over the middle of the field. Now, Justin Jefferson is really damn good to begin with. Not sure what the Green Bay Packer game plan was against him and why it wasn't adjusted, because he just was running wild. I think that's going to be an issue all season long. I really liked did the hated Green Bay Packers generate any pass rush? Not really. But I liked the Minnesota offense coming into this season. Kirk Cousins, while he has his flaws, is solid enough. I like what they have at receiver. The offensive line is solid. I was more curious about the Minnesota defense. They really struggled the last couple of years. I didn't think they made enough inroads to be considerably better. I thought that game yesterday was going to be a shootout. I was expecting something like 35-28, 35-31. So I really don't know what to make of that. Is Minnesota's defense better than I expected? Is the Green Bay offense a lot worse than I expected? I do know that that the wide receiving core for Green Bay kind of concerned me even more than it already did coming into the season. I missed the Christian Watson touchdown drop or the over the shoulder live. I just got a text from a couple friends. I'm in a thread with friends that are Green Bay Packer fans, and I can't even repeat it here. It was just a string of expletives, and I looked up to see the replay and was like, "Oh yeah, that's bad." So I mean, the Packers look like they have some issues moving forward.
Yeah, it is. It is important to remember that last year the Packers were dismantled by the Saints in Week 1. Eventually, obviously, were able to get things corrected pretty quickly and went on to win 13 games. Obviously, they no longer have Devontae Adams, and so you mentioned maybe that pretty key drop early in the game that maybe changes things. Aaron Rodgers himself even kind of acknowledged that maybe it changed things a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. I take more from the Vikings offense, but coming into this game, coming into the season, I thought both teams were more of an underplay anyways. And that's what I wrote about at shawlocal.com/bet, kind of how to bet each team. I thought Packers defense and the Vikings, just with their style of play, I thought they would both lean more under. But you're right. Justin Jefferson and the Vikings offense were kind of cooking. And I don't know. It feels like maybe the Packers had missed opportunities that they could have capitalized.
So Minnesota is more of a wild card to me than Green Bay, because we know the coaching staff in Green Bay. We know what they want to, how they want to run their offense. They want to be kind of methodical. They want to utilize their running backs in the passing game. They're not going to take a ton of deep shots. Like, they're typically pretty efficient. I don't know what to make of the Minnesota offense, though, because they have a lot of explosive playmakers. They just didn't really utilize them under the prior coaching staff. So we got a new regime, a new front office in Minnesota, and Green Bay played in such a fashion yesterday that Minnesota didn't really need to push the pace. So that's one thing moving forward. I'm interested to see, is Minnesota going to continue to be kind of either a slow pace or neutral pace team, or when they get into games where they're pushed, if they're going to speed up a little more than they did last year. There was times last year where Dalvin Cook was still getting the ball. They'd be down 10 points, and Dalvin Cook is running the ball. And my God, you have Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen open up the offense.
Yeah, absolutely. It was cool. Like, we didn't really know what the Kevin O'Connell team was going to look like, right? Because even Kirk Cousins didn't play in the preseason, so there was nothing you could take away from the preseason of the Vikings. And just to see Justin Jefferson in game 1 line up all over the field, he was on the outside slot, even had a tight end snap, according to Pro Football Focus. So it's just it was interesting to see him kind of utilize him in different ways and not kind of just say, hey, you're going to play slot or you're going to play X receiver. So I thought that was at least interesting. But yeah, I eventually think the Packers will get this figured out. The bigger concern for me has always been with Aaron Rodgers, especially since kind of Matt LaFleur has come in. Is that offense line able to protect him up front? Because when he has to get off script and do things out of structure, he's still very good and can make all the throws. I tend to think he makes more mistakes when he does that. And so I'm less worried about the receivers and more worried about his tackles. If he gets his tackles healthy, I think he's going to get figured out.
Yeah, he was clearly frustrated yesterday, and Aaron Rodgers, for his entire career, that was the one way to beat him, is get him frustrated. He will do dumb things. And you have to assume that those are going to become a little more consistent as he continues to get up there in age.
Yeah. Real quick to close this thing out, a couple minutes here. Anything else in the NFL that caught your eye? There was a lot of things that happened in week one. We had a tie. Steelers upset Cincinnati. So congrats to anybody who had Steelers plus 6.5 or plus 7 earlier this week, because that was awesome. What else kind of jumped out to you?
A couple of things. 2 games you mentioned there. It was interesting. I was looking through different projections for DFS on Sunday morning, and it kept noticing that the Pittsburgh Steelers and projections for people that are a lot smarter than I am that put these together were projecting the Pittsburgh defense to have a big day. And I was like, man, I really don't see that. That Steelers defense was bad last year. I expect the Bengals to continue firing on all cylinders. And Joe Burrow threw a pick 6 in the first quarter. Mm-hmm. And I went, yeah, that's why they get paid the money that they do. And I'm doing this. But so I was concerned a bit by that performance from Cincinnati going to the NFC North. Detroit took the loss, but that offense was a lot better yesterday. DeAndre Swift, I love a lot, looked really good. They utilized him and Jamal Williams in that backfield. DJ Shark, I thought was an underrated sign. He kind of got lost in the shuffle because of how bad Jacksonville has been, and then it was just a clown show with Urban Meyer last year. So I thought Detroit made a really good under the radar signing with him. I think that offense is going to be able to put points on the board. I just don't think they're going to be able to stop anyone. So those are games that are going to be shootouts. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to take overs when the Detroit Lions are involved. And one more thing there. I love AJ Brown coming out of college, and you'd see those big spike games with him with Tennessee, but they were so run oriented, and Ryan Tannehill they've done a good job of maximizing Ryan Tannehill's abilities, but he's limited. And seeing AJ Brown just being a grown ass man in the Philadelphia Eagles offense yesterday, that was a lot of fun, because that's what I like. He is capable of that. He is capable of being a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL. So the Eagles offense has a potential to be a lot of fun to watch.
I am glad you mentioned that Eagles-Lions game, because that's the one I sat down and watched last night right away. The Lions have fascinated me all summer. I have not understood the hype around them. I don't get why they're the most popular over on the win totals. Like, that defense is still very bad. And so when I wrote, how to bet the NFC North teams, I finally just came to the conclusion that how to bet Detroit is bet the overs, right? Like, this defense is bad. The offense shows a lot of potential. Worked in week one because the over was never in doubt there. But I think what is interesting is people may think that because the score was 38-35 final, that, hey, the Lions, they covered again, and maybe it's a step in the right direction, and maybe this is a team that we can believe in again. But it was very misleading final score. Like, after that pick 6 by the Eagles there in the second quarter, it was 21-7. The Lions never had a shot after that. All 4 of their last touchdown drives came when they were trailing by double digits. So I think it's always important to kind of look closer at how these games kind of, shook out. The Lions lost by 3. They covered the spread, but they never had a chance to win this game after the second quarter. So maybe they're still a team that you can bet to cover the spread. But I still think as long as Jared Goff is their quarterback, they are limited at how many games they can win. Yeah,
I mean, that was a classic example of, if you took the win total, I don't think you should feel great about Detroit being like, that is still not a good team. I just think that from a fantasy perspective and a betting perspective, I think the offense is going to be a lot better when it comes to prop bets this year. I think there's going to be some fun games out of that Detroit Lions offense where you can probably make some money.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Lions do play the Commanders in week 2, so maybe they do get a win. I don't know. I might be tempted to bet the Commanders.
That was another game, Washington and Jacksonville, where I'm not sure what to make of that.
Yeah. I think the Commanders are a little bit underrated, especially in NFC East that is now wide open with the Cowboys and Dak being injured. But I don't know. I don't know what to make of that one either. Watch that game.
One of my biggest preseason takes was that Antonio Gibson is actually good, and he's one of those people that fans have hated on because of he's been benched several times for the fumble issues, which that is an issue. But and it's unfortunate what happened to Brian Robinson before the season. That that certainly stinks. Yeah. And but Antonio Gibson finished top 10 last year in fantasy. He might have even approached top 6, if not top 5. And while he has his flaws, I do think Antonio Gibson does a lot of things really well, and if he's able to perform like he did yesterday on a consistent basis, both in the run game and particularly in the passing game, I think the Washington offense is going to surprise a few people, even if I very, very much dislike Carson Wentz.
Yeah, and they weren't even super healthy in week 1. So, they're not at their healthiest just yet. One more game that stood out to me before we close this thing out is the Colts-Texans tie. It looks pretty bad on paper because the Colts were, an 8-point favorite open, and it closed at like touchdown favorite. It looks pretty bad on paper, but I think if you look at the box score, I mean, the Colts crushed the Texans in a lot of ways. They crushed them in yards per play. They just never finished a drive to save their life. And so I think Colts are a clear buyback team if the market is low on them, because I don't remember who they're playing week 2. I think they're playing the Jags. But yeah, I think there's a chance that it could buy a low on them, because while it was close and while it was surprising, I think low key the Colts kind of should have won that game pretty convincingly.
Long term, I think Indianapolis will be fine. The one thing that does stick out that immediately popped in was with the way that game was going for them, was looking back last year, week 18, win and in situation for the Colts. Yeah. And they went out and laid an absolute dud against Jacksonville. And now here you go, week 1 against a Houston team that many people think is going to be the worst in the league, and you're struggling to get past them. At some point, you worry that it's going to have an impact on their psyche in the locker room. It's 1 week. Don't want to read into it too much, but you're really hoping for the type of performance that you need out of or expect out of Indianapolis in week 2. Because if they come out flat again or unable to put away a team that they should, I'd say that's a sign to start worrying a little bit.
Comment from Mike Johnson on our YouTube page. This is for real how we're going to end this show. He says NFC West is 0-3. How are we betting Seattle, Denver? I'll give my 2 cents because I just wrote a story for shawlocal.com/bet at BetChicagoSports. But I am targeting the prop market here. I'm going under on completions for Geno Smith at 17.5, and under on attempts for Geno Smith at 30.5. Basically, both as passing unders. I think they're somewhat correlated. I just envision this being a slower paced game. Unders went 10-5 in week 1. So if that trend continues, you won't see a whole lot of points or a lot of lengthy offensive drives. And so I would think that Pete Carroll, he wants to lean on the ground game and give his running backs the ball. I can't imagine he's trusting Geno Smith a whole lot. And so that's how I plan to bet this game. I think the spread and total are pretty in line with what my numbers are. Do you have any leans on what you think, how this game's going to unfold?
I think Denver is going to be one of the best teams in football this year. A couple things that are, when it comes to betting this game, that are difficult to tell is you look at Russell Wilson the last couple of years in Seattle, and you look at Shane. I don't know if you know, like the let Russ cook movement. Like when Seattle pushed the pace and aired the ball out with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, that was a really fun offense, and they shied away from that really midway through the 2020 season and all of last season. They wanted to be ground oriented, and it was really frustrating that Pete Carroll went that way. Now you look at Russ coming into a situation in Denver where I really love everything in that wide receiver core. Jerry Jeudy, I think it's going to have a breakout year. Cortland Sutton is under the radar because of the injury situation. Sucks that they lost Tim Patrick because I thought Tim Patrick was in for a good year, but KJ Hamler, like the question I have with Denver, because again, you're talking about a new coaching staff. If they decide to push the pace, I think that this game is going to be one-sided. If it's kind of a low-scoring slog, I think Seattle covers. The one thing about Seattle is everyone, because they're going into this rebuild, is just, well, this team's going to be dreadful. And they probably are. But they still do have DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett at wide receiver. And those are 2 giant big play guys that can really take anything to the house. Like, if they're able to get any kind of an opening, I think the offense might be a bit more efficient than people realize. I don't think that it's going to be a disaster.
Well, hopefully it's efficient, but gets under both my props because I have money on the line. So that was really mean of you to say, Kyle. I think that is going to do it for this edition of the Bet Chicago Sports Podcast. If you missed the live version, the live stream on Twitter or on YouTube, we are on audio platforms at Apple and Spotify. Easy, just the name of the podcast at Bet Chicago Sports. Again, sign up with Caesar Sportsbook today and get a new user offer on us. And I'll be back on Thursday to preview the Thursday night football matchup between the Chiefs and Chargers. Very excited about that one. But week one was fun. Let's end on a high note with Monday Night Football and Russell Wilson's homecoming in Seattle. He's Kyle Nabors. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Shane Jackson, and see you next time.